The list had 12 items on it. Zoya read it over one final time by the light of a candle that was losing its argument with the wind coming through the gap in the shutter, the paper close to her face, her handwriting cramped and precise the way everything about her was cramped and precise. Her sentences, her patience, her opinion of men who traded daughters like livestock at market day. She had written the list in the 3 hours after her father had told her what he'd done, working through her fury the only way she knew how, which was by converting it into organized information. Item 1. She retained independent authority over all medical decisions. Item 2. No restrictions on her movement within the territory. Item 3. Her own quarters, her own key, no exceptions. Item 4. She had crossed this one out and rewritten it twice before getting the language right. No public performance of affection without prior agreement. Not because she was naive about what a political mating involved, but because there was a difference between political performance and being required to look at a man like you, meant it when you didn't. Item 5 through 12 covered the specifics of her work, her access to supplies, her right to communicate with her father's pack, and the terms under which the arrangement would be considered fulfilled. She folded the list and put it in the inside pocket of her coat, where it sat against her sternum like armor. Her father knocked twice on the doorframe. She had taken the door off its hinges 3 years ago to improve the airflow. A decision he had never approved of and had never been able to argue her out of, and leaned in with the expression of a man who knew he had done a significant wrong and was trying to determine whether apology or justification would land better. She looked at him. He chose neither, which was perhaps the wisest choice available. "The convoy comes at dawn," he said. "I know when the convoy comes." "Zoya." "Papa." She said it quietly, without anger, because the anger had burned out in the 3 hours of list writing, and what remained was something older and tireder and more complicated. "I'm going. I've decided I'm going. You don't need to manage me through it." He is said to be. I know what he is said to be. She picked up her medical bag, packed with the methodical precision of someone who had prepared for contingencies she didn't want to name, and set it by the door. "I have 12 conditions. If he accepts them, we have a workable arrangement. If he doesn't, we have a different kind of problem which I will address when it presents itself." Her father looked at her with the specific grief of a man who loved his daughter very much and had done something very stupid and knew that her competence was the only reason it was going to be survivable. "You make it sound manageable," he said. "I make everything sound manageable," she said. "It's a professional habit. Most things aren't actually manageable. You just work on them anyway." She blew out the candle and went to bed and did not sleep, and at dawn the convoy came, and she climbed into it with her bag and her coat and her list and the absolute, iron-boned refusal to let any of this break her. She had no way of knowing in that first gray morning that she was not the only one arriving at the Stonemark compound with terms they had no intention of abandoning. That was, she would later think, perhaps the only thing the two of them had ever truly had in common. It turned out to be enough. Chapter 1. The Stonemark Pack's compound had been built by someone who believed that architecture should make a point. The outer walls were volcanic stone, dark gray fading to near black at the base, worn smooth in some sections and left deliberately rough in others, so that the overall impression was of something that had been here before the concept of packs existed and intended to be here after they were gone. The main gate was iron, worked in the interlocking wolf knot pattern that the Northern Territory's old records associated with the Voss bloodline, which was not, Zoya noted, the name of the current Alpha King, which meant either a marriage or a conquest somewhere in the lineage, both of which were interesting in different ways. She made herself stop cataloging the architecture and pay attention to the immediate situation, which was a receiving line of ranked wolves who were looking at her with a range of expressions she found informative. Curiosity from the younger ones, assessment from the ranked females. A carefully neutral professional attention from the man she identified as the head enforcer, broad, scarred at the jaw, his eyes doing the work of someone mapping a space for vulnerabilities. He found none in her posture because she had practiced her posture specifically for this. And at the end of the receiving line, standing on the steps of the pack house with the compound stone bulk behind him and the morning light falling in a way that she strongly suspected was not accidental, the Alpha King, Ryker. She had received 2 descriptions of him in the weeks before the convoy. The first was from her father, who had met him once and described him as formidable, a word her father used for things he was afraid of and didn't want to admit to being afraid of. The second was from Marit, her oldest friend and the closest thing she had to a reliable intelligence source, who had spent 2 weeks asking questions and had sent a letter that said, "He doesn't make small expressions. Whatever he's feeling is either the whole face or nothing at all." Right now, it's been nothing at all for 3 years. Something happened. No one will say what. Looking at him now, she thought Marit had been accurate. He was tall in the uncomplicated way of wolves who had been trained from childhood to occupy space as a tactical decision. His hair was dark brown, worn close, his jaw sharp under what she diagnosed as 2 days of unshaved growth. Not grooming negligence, she thought. More likely time negligence, the look of a man who prioritized other things. His eyes were the specific gray-green of deep water that appears one color from the surface and another when you're actually in it. They were looking at her with an expression that was, as Marit had promised, exactly nothing. She walked toward him and did not look away from his eyes and stopped at a distance that was respectful but not deferential. She had measured the difference in her head and practiced it. 5 feet, the distance between equals considering a transaction. "Alpha King Ryker," she said. "Zoya Vesh." His voice was what she'd expected from the architecture. Low, unhurried, built like something that would still be standing when everything else had been cleared away. "You traveled well?" "I traveled adequately. I'd like to skip the ceremony and get to the terms if that's acceptable." "I have 12 conditions." Something moved through the ranked wolves around them, a ripple of suppressed reaction, the specific collective tension of people watching someone do a thing that is not done. She did not look at them. She watched his face. The nothing expression didn't change, but something behind it, something in the gray-green eyes, shifted in a way she couldn't categorize. "Come inside," he said. The room he took her to was a study rather than a throne room, which she appreciated. Throne rooms were designed for power dynamics. Studies were designed for work. She sat across the desk from him without waiting to be invited to sit, which she did on purpose, and she put the list on the desk between them and watched him read it. He read it straight through once. Then he went back to item 4, the public performance clause, and read it again. She watched his face with the professional attention she gave symptoms, looking for what the body was actually communicating beneath what it was presenting. "This one," he said, indicating item 4, non-negotiable. "I wasn't going to negotiate it. I was going to tell you it's unnecessary. I have no interest in performance." That was either very reassuring or the specific kind of statement that meant she needed to pay more attention. "Item 7, she said, unrestricted access to all affected warriors. No medical gatekeeping by your enforcers." Agreed. Item 9, If I determine that a case exceeds what I can treat with available resources, I have the right to bring in outside consultation without requiring your approval for each instance. Agreed. With the amendment that you notify me before bringing non-pack wolves into the compound, not after. She considered this. Accepted. Item 12, he said. He had reached the last one. You want a written contract. I want a written contract witnessed by your senior elder and mine. He looked at her for a moment with the deep water eyes. You came here expecting to be dismissed. I came here prepared for any available outcome. There's a difference. You came here expecting a man who would accept you as an asset and not as a person with terms. He said this without edge, as a simple observation, which is a reasonable expectation given the circumstances, and you prepared for it anyway. He picked up the list and stood. I'll have the contract drawn up by this evening. You'll want to review the medical wing before then. Cassian can show you. He's been managing the cases since the poisoning started, and he'll know where the gaps are. She stood. How many warriors? 14 affected, 3 critical, 2 already lost. She heard the last 2 words and felt them the way she always felt those particular words, not abstract, not statistical, but specific. 2 people, 2 wolves who had been alive and weren't. How long has it been in the system? 6 weeks since the first presentation. We didn't identify it as deliberate until week 3. Then we've already lost time. She picked up her medical bag. Take me to the medical wing now. The contract can wait 2 hours. He looked at her with a nothing expression. Then he turned and led the way, and she followed. And neither of them acknowledged the fact that she had just redirected the Alpha King of the Northern Territory, and he had simply adjusted course. She filed it, though. She filed everything. Chapter 2. The medical wing smelled of dried wolfsbane and iron, and the particular undertone that she associated with long illness. Not the sharp scent of acute crisis, but the slow, accumulated heaviness of bodies fighting something they couldn't identify and were gradually losing. She walked through it with Cassian beside her, a compact, quick-eyed wolf who she identified within 5 minutes as someone who genuinely understood what he was doing and was exhausted by the limits of what he could do with the tools he had. He walked her through the cases with the efficiency of a man who had told this story too many times and needed it to result in something different. 14 wolves, all male, all from the same elite unit. Ryker's Vanguard, the small force he kept closest, the ones who went first into whatever needed going into first. The poisoning had entered through a shared supply chain. They'd determined that much. A biological agent introduced into the unit's standard salve. The compound resin mixture that Vanguard wolves applied before extended operations, absorbed through the skin rather than ingested, which was why it had taken 3 weeks to identify as deliberate. What does it do? She said, standing at the first bed. First month, fatigue. Attributed to overtraining, dismissed. Weeks 5 and 6, the wolf self begins to destabilize. The connection between the human and wolf aspects of their nature starts to fracture, is the best word I have for it. They can't shift reliably. In the 3 critical cases, they can't shift at all. She looked at the wolf in the first bed. He was young, 20, perhaps 22, and he was awake and looking at the ceiling with the flat attention of someone who has removed themselves from the experience of their own body, because the experience has become too much to maintain. She recognized that look. She had seen it in her own patients after long illness, the specific dissociation of a person deciding that presence was optional. "What's his name?" she said. "Dort." She sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't look at her. "Dort, I'm Zoya. I'm a healer. I'm going to look at your hands, not to examine you yet, just to look." "Is that acceptable?" He turned his head. His eyes were dark brown and very tired. "You're the one they brought in," he said. "I'm the one they brought in." "Did it work last time, when they brought someone in?" She looked at Cassian. Cassian looked at the window. "Tell me," Dort said. "I don't know what happened last time," she said. "I know what I'm going to do this time. May I look at your hands?" He held them out. She took them, large hands, calloused at the base of the fingers in the pattern of a wolf who had been training since before the calluses were big enough to be useful. And she closed her eyes and let her gift move through her in the careful, attentive way she used for diagnosis, the way her grandmother had taught her, which involved not looking for something specific, but simply listening to what the body was trying to communicate. The poison was elegant. That was the first thing she understood, and it made her cold. There was nothing accidental about its structure. It had been designed by someone who understood wolf biology at a cellular level, who knew the exact mechanism by which the human and wolf aspects of a shifter's nature were maintained in productive tension, and who had engineered a compound that destabilized precisely that mechanism, not a blunt instrument, a scalpel. Someone had spent a significant amount of time building this. She set Dort's hands down and looked at him. "Have you been sleeping?" "Not well." "I'm going to give Cassian a compound to prepare for tonight. It won't fix what's broken yet. I need more time to understand the full architecture of the thing. But it will help you sleep properly. Real sleep, not the half sleep you've been managing. Your body needs rest in order to respond to treatment." He looked at her with the flat eyes. "You think you can fix it?" "I think the person who built this thing was very intelligent and not particularly concerned with the lives of the people they were building it for, which means they were optimizing for effectiveness without having to care about consequences. That's a design perspective with exploitable weaknesses." She stood. "Yes, I think I can fix it." She was not entirely certain she could fix it, but she had learned, treating wolves in crisis, that there was a specific moment at which a patient decided whether to cooperate with their own recovery, and that it often had less to do with the treatment than with whether they believed it was worth trying. She said what she said intentionally. She would make it true if she had to take the thing apart piece by piece. She spent the next 4 hours with the remaining 13, building a picture of the poison's progression across the full spectrum of its stages, early, middle, critical, and by the end of it, she had the outline of what she was dealing with, and the outline was both worse and more specific than she'd hoped, which at least meant it was workable. She found Ryker waiting at the medical wing's entrance when she came out. "You stayed," she said. "I wanted your initial assessment." Initial assessment. This was made by a specialist. Specifically, someone who has studied Vanguard wolf physiology, which means someone with either academic access to pack medical records or direct operative experience with your unit. The compound targets the shifter bond with a precision that isn't available to someone working from general wolf biology. They knew your wolves specifically. His jaw set in the way she was beginning to recognize as his version of a significant reaction, a tightening, barely perceptible, that meant the thing had landed somewhere important. "Which enemy pack?" she said. "We have a candidate. I'll need their medical research if you have any intelligence on it. Whatever they used to build this was developed over time. There may be earlier versions, less refined. That will tell me about the mechanism. I'll have it on your desk by morning. I'll need a workroom, not the medical wing. Something with better light and more bench space." "Done." She looked at him. "How long have you known about the Vanguard specifically? That they were the target and not the general pack?" 3 weeks. "And you've been managing it alone since then?" That's what alphas do. She wanted to say something about what that approach cost, the specific kind of damage that accumulating responsibility without distribution caused over time. But she didn't know him well enough yet, and it wasn't her question to ask. She filed it with the other things she was filing. "Good night, Alpha King." "Ryker," he said, "if we're going to be working together, the title is inefficient." She considered this. "Good night, Ryker." She walked back to the east quarters she'd been given, sat at the desk, and began writing. Chapter 3. 3 weeks into the treatment, she had a rhythm. Up before dawn, because the morning was the best time for the compound preparation. The ambient temperature in the workroom was lower, and the reactions were more predictable. 2 hours of preparation, 1 hour of rounds in the medical wing, administrative time for documentation because the documentation was not optional, and she had had to make that clear to Cassian twice before he'd started taking it seriously. Afternoon was for research. The intelligence files Ryker had provided on the enemy pack's known operatives had included, buried in the tactical reports, 3 medical research abstracts that she suspected had been included without anyone understanding their relevance, which was both infuriating and useful. She was making progress. The early-stage cases were stabilizing. She could see the wolf self beginning to reintegrate in 2 of the 4 wolves who had been presenting at that level, and the improvement was genuine and measurable, and she was cautiously proud of it. In the internal, quiet way, she was proud of things that she didn't want to examine too closely in case looking at them collapsed them. The critical cases were harder. Dort was responding slowly. She could feel the improvement in the quality of his wolf bond when she did her diagnostic holds, a gradual return of warmth to something that had been going cold. But slowly was not quickly, and quickly was what she needed. The 2 warriors she had not been able to save before her arrival sat with her in the way that losses always sat with her, which was present and specific and not something she expected to go away. She had learned early that the correct relationship to professional loss was neither to dismiss it nor to be destroyed by it, but to carry it as information. Let it sharpen the work, not dull it. On a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week, she found herself in the workroom after midnight because she had finally understood the specific enzyme inhibitor at the core of the poison's mechanism and could not stop working once she had understood it, and Ryker appeared in the doorway with the particular quality of someone who had been passing by and stopped rather than someone who had come looking. "You should be sleeping," he said. "You're here at midnight as well." "I was doing rounds." "At midnight?" He looked at the workbench, the organized apparatus of her research, the labeled compounds, the reference texts open at multiple points, the pages of her own notes in the cramped hand she'd had since childhood. "Have you eaten?" "Cassian brought something earlier." "When earlier?" She thought about it. "Afternoon." He left. He came back 7 minutes later with bread and cold meat and a cup of something hot, which he set on the clear section of the workbench with the matter-of-fact delivery of a man who was performing an act of care and was very determined not to have that categorized. She looked at the food. She looked at him. "This isn't in the contract," she said. "The contract covers medical and residential terms. It doesn't address nutritional negligence." She pulled the food toward her. "I found the enzyme inhibitor," she said, because there was something about having him in the room that made her want to share the discovery rather than wait until morning, and she was not going to examine that. The compound disrupts the production of a specific binding enzyme that maintains the relationship between the shifter's dual nature. It's elegant, as these things go. Horrifying, but elegant. The counteraction is going to require synthesizing something that mimics the enzyme long enough for the body to restart its own production. Can you do that? I believe so. I need 2 compounds that I don't currently have in stock. Animal-derived. I'll need someone to source them. Give me the list in the morning. I'll write it now and you can take it when you leave. She wrote the list and handed it across the workbench, and he took it and looked at it and said nothing for a moment. How long? He said. To synthesize it and begin treatment on the critical cases. A week, once I have the materials. The treatment itself will take 2 to 3 weeks per critical case, administered daily. And the early stage cases? Already improving. I expect full resolution in 2 weeks for those. He was quiet. She ate the bread without tasting it. Watching him in the peripheral way she had learned was less threatening to complicated people than direct observation. They trust you, he said at last. The unit. I haven't given them a reason not to. Dort asked me this morning whether you were staying past the 6 months. She set down the bread. That was a more complicated sentence than it appeared on the surface. What did you tell him? I told him the arrangement was for 6 months, as contracted. Good. He didn't find it good. Dort's preferences about my contract are noted, but not the deciding factor, she said. Any more than your preferences about my contract would be. He looked at her with the deep water eyes, which had something in them she was beginning to identify as the thing Marit had described. The whole face or nothing, and this was not quite nothing. It was something small and specific that she had no label for yet. Get some sleep, he said. He left. She sat in the empty workroom for a few minutes after the sound of his footsteps had faded, then put herself to bed with the methodical efficiency of someone who has decided not to think about a thing and is going to succeed. Chapter 4. She learned about the lost ones from Cassian. Not as a deliberate disclosure. Cassian was constitutionally incapable of deliberate disclosure, which she found endearing, but in the way information comes out during long work sessions, when 2 people are focused on a shared task, and the social monitoring that normally governs what you say to someone you don't fully know yet relaxes. They were documenting the week 4 progress assessments when Cassian mentioned, with the studied casualness of someone offering a piece of context that was actually a piece of context he had been waiting to offer, that the previous healer had been brought in after week 1 of the poisoning. I didn't know there had been a previous healer, she said carefully. Brought in week 2, stayed 4 days, determined it was untreatable with available methods and advised Ryker to prepare for losses. He said the word advised with a specific quality that indicated it was a diplomatic replacement for a different word. Ryker had already lost Vance and Penner by then. The 2 before I arrived? Yes, Vance had been in the Vanguard for 12 years. He and Ryker, they came up together, same training cohort. Vance made the unit with him before Ryker made Alpha. Cassian's hands kept moving over the documentation. After Penner, Ryker stopped sleeping in his quarters. He hasn't been in his quarters since week 3. She absorbed this. Where does he sleep? Medical wing anteroom mostly. He thinks we don't notice. We notice. She thought about the midnight rounds. She thought about the bread and cold meat appearing on her workbench. She thought about the way he had looked at her that first day in the study and the precise absence of expression that she was increasingly reading not as coldness, but as the specific face a person makes when they are containing something they have decided they cannot afford to put down. She thought about the list she had compiled of all the things about him that she was not going to pay attention to, and noted that the list was getting longer rather than shorter, which was exactly the wrong direction. She encountered the weight of what he was carrying most directly on a Thursday in the 4th week. When she came out of the medical wing after the evening rounds and found him in the corridor outside Dort's room, standing with his back against the wall and his arms crossed and his face doing the thing that was not nothing, a specific, contained internal quality that she recognized, having now seen it several times, as the expression of a man listening to something he couldn't turn off. Dort had a bad hour, she said. It wasn't a question. He shifted. Ryker said it without looking at her. Partially, he couldn't maintain it. He shifted back before he was ready, and it... A pause. He was in pain. I know, I was there. He's stable now and sleeping. She stood beside him in the corridor, not quite beside him, the gap between them, the professional distance she kept by default. It's going to happen again before it doesn't happen anymore. The reconnection process is not linear. When the enzyme reintegration works, there are going to be moments where the bond tries to reassert itself and the body isn't quite ready for it. That's not regression. It's healing, trying to happen faster than the tissue can support. I know that. Then why are you standing in the corridor looking like someone told you the world is ending? He looked at her then, the deep water eyes fully present with nothing in them that was nothing, because I put them in that supply rotation. The decision to use the standardized salve, that was mine. I could have varied the approach by unit, I considered it, and I chose standardization because it simplified the logistics. The enemy pack introduced the poison into that supply chain. That is not the same as you introducing the poison. The decision that made them vulnerable was mine. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about what she was going to say and whether she should say it, and decided the contract gave her the right to say things he didn't want to hear. You can carry that if you want to. You can carry it indefinitely. The specific version of it where your decision is the relevant decision and not the decision of whoever built the compound and infiltrated your supply chain. That it's available to you. It will also cost you things you can't afford to lose right now, like sleep and the ability to think clearly and the specific quality of presence that your unit needs from you. So I'd suggest considering a different carry. A different carry. The version where your decision exists in a chain of decisions, only one of which was yours, and where the weight you carry is the weight of getting them through this, rather than the weight of how it started. He was quiet for a long moment. The corridor was dim, the main lights turned down for the night, a single wall lamp doing the work of illumination. She could see the line of his jaw, the way the darkness filled in the angles of his face. "That's very clinical," he said. "I'm a healer. Everything I say is going to be somewhat clinical." It wasn't a criticism. I know. She turned to go. "Dort is going to be all right, Ryker. I need you to believe that. Not as comfort, as a medical opinion." She walked back to the east quarters without looking back. And she spent the walk being very firm with herself about the fact that she was not going to keep noticing things about him, which worked well right up until it didn't. Chapter 5. The materials arrived on a Friday, and she began synthesis immediately and worked through the weekend in the specific focused trance of a healer who has understood the problem and can see the solution and is doing everything in her power to bridge the gap between them. Cassian assisted, and she taught him as she went, because the knowledge was too important to keep in one person's head, and because Cassian absorbed instruction with the patient, thorough attention of someone who understood that the point of learning was not performance, but application. She administered the first dose of the enzyme mimic to Dort on a Monday morning, with Ryker present because he had been present for every significant treatment step in the critical cases, and she had stopped pretending this required comment. Dort received the treatment with his eyes closed and his hands flat on the blanket, and the particular stillness of someone trusting something they couldn't verify. She held the diagnostic contact for the 20 minutes the initial absorption required, tracking the compound's movement through the relevant pathways, noting where it integrated cleanly and where the body's defenses pushed back in ways she'd have to adjust for in subsequent doses. When she released the hold and opened her eyes, Dort was looking at her. "I felt something," he said. "Tell me what you felt." "Warm, in the place that's been cold." He touched his chest, the instinctive gesture toward the wolf self. He stopped. Like the door's still locked, but someone turned the light on in the room behind it? He looked at her for a moment, with the dark eyes that were less flat than they had been when she'd arrived. "Exactly like that." "Good. That's exactly right. That's what we need." She stood and turned, and Ryker was looking at her from where he stood by the window with the whole face expression. Not the nothing, not the contained internal look, but something open and direct that she hadn't seen from him yet, and that she catalogued with the professional attention she brought to everything and filed in the specific drawer she was pretending didn't exist. "2 more days for the second dose," she said. "Then we assess." He nodded. He didn't say anything. She found that she didn't need him to. She was learning the compound's rhythms in the way you learn a place's rhythms when you live inside them long enough, not by studying them, but by becoming a moving part of the machinery. The training grounds ran from dawn until mid-morning, with a systematic organization that she gathered was entirely Ryker's design. The kitchens operated on a schedule she had initially found baffling, and had eventually decoded as the work of a head cook who had strong opinions about thermal optimization. The evening hours had a particular quality of settling, the compound's population moving toward their quarters in a loose drift that she had started to look forward to, without having made a conscious decision to start looking forward to it. The Vanguard wolves, the ones she was treating, had developed a habit of acknowledging her in the corridors that went beyond the professional courtesy the rest of the pack extended. Nods that carried something specific, brief, direct eye contact, the occasional word of thanks that they delivered the way wolves delivered things they found vulnerable, quickly, with minimal ceremony, and then removed themselves before she could respond. She received it all without making it into anything, because making it into something would have required acknowledging how much she had not expected to matter to these people, and how much it turned out that she did. Ryker found her on the compound's north wall on a Wednesday evening in the 5th week, a walkway along the interior face of the stone, built for watch purposes but accessible to anyone. With a view of the forest that was best in the hour before full dark, when the light went gold through the canopy and the world below organized itself into something peaceful. She had not expected company. She did not say so. He stood beside her, the gap, the professional distance, the constant maintenance of appropriate space, and looked at the forest. And she looked at it too, and for a while neither of them said anything. "Your friend wrote to you," he said. "Marit, yes, you read the pack correspondence?" "Security protocol, all external communications. The content of yours is your own. I receive the metadata, not the text." "Good." She seems concerned. Marit is always concerned. It's her resting state. A pause. "Are you?" he said. "Concerned?" She considered the question properly. "About the treatment?" "Less so than I was 3 weeks ago." "About being here?" She stopped and reframed. "I'm not concerned about being here. I was, initially. I'm not now." "What changed?" She looked at the forest going dark in stages. The canopy first, then the middle distance, then the floor. "The work is real," she said. "When the work is real, the place tends to become real. That's not a philosophy I'd recommend developing. It's a liability professionally, but it's the honest answer." He was quiet again. The gold in the canopy deepened to amber. "Marit's letter asked whether you were being treated well," he said. "I know what Marit's letters ask. I wanted you to know that the answer, whatever you told her, I would want it to be accurate." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the forest. His profile was the specific combination of sharp lines and deep-set eyes that she had been not noticing for 5 weeks, and she was done pretending the effort that not noticing required. "It is accurate," she said. He turned, and their eyes met in the amber light, and neither of them said anything else, and the forest below finished going dark. Chapter 6. She woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of something wrong. She had trained herself over years of night calls and emergency responses and the particular alertness that a healer develops who is the only healer in a 50-mile radius, to wake fully rather than in stages. She was sitting up with her feet on the floor before she had fully processed what had pulled her from sleep, the diagnostic instinct running ahead of conscious thought. Wrong, wrong. Something in the building is wrong. Identify. The window was open 2 inches. She had left it open 4. She was out of bed and moving toward the workroom, where her medical bag was, where the most important compounds were stored, when the door to the hallway opened. He was not large. That was the first thing, filed automatically alongside the weight of the darkness, the silence of his movement, the specific absence of any sound a normally present person would make. Medium build, dark clothes, the hood of the kind worn by people who knew how to move in occupied spaces. He was looking at her with the professional attention of someone who had expected to find her asleep and was recalibrating. She reached the workbench. "Don't," he said. His voice was low and without effect. Not cruel, just empty. Of anything that was not the task. "I'm not here for you to demonstrate your knowledge of counteragents. I'm here to deliver a message." "A message?" she said. Her hands were on the workbench. Her fingers found the edge of the ceramic container that held the suspended wolfsbane concentrate, which was not a weapon, but could be a deterrent. "You could have sent a letter. Letters can be intercepted." He took 1 step into the room. "The message is that the Vanguard healing program should be discontinued. Your involvement in it creates a timeline problem for the people I work for. They would prefer that the current trajectory continue uninterrupted. The trajectory where Ryker's elite unit is progressively incapacitated. Yes, and if I don't discontinue." He looked at her with the empty professional attention. He didn't answer which was the answer. She threw the wolfsbane concentrate, not at him, at the wall mount of the lamp between them, which shattered and sent the burning wick and the oil both into the air, and the brief disorientation of light and heat was the 3 seconds she needed to move left along the bench, put its full length between them, and get the window fully open. She was calculating the drop to the ground, 12 feet, manageable, when the door to the corridor burst inward and Corbin came through it with 2 Vanguard wolves behind him with the focused speed of people responding to an alert. The assassin moved. He was very fast, genuinely fast, not the fast of a large, strong wolf, but the fast of someone trained specifically for speed and evasion. He went through the window she'd opened. She heard him land, and then nothing. Corvin reached her in 2 strides. "Are you hurt?" "No." She was still holding the empty ceramic container. Her hands were steady, which she noted with the clinical part of her mind that kept running regardless of circumstances. He went out the window, north side. Corvin spoke into a communication device at his collar, and she heard 3 brief responses, the sound of the compound mobilizing. She set the container down carefully and looked at the lamp oil burning on the floor, the small fire it had made, and she picked up her coat from the hook and smothered it with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done that specific thing before. Ryker arrived 4 minutes after Corvin. She knew it was 4 minutes because she had been counting in the way she counted during procedures. Not because the number mattered, but because counting was a way of staying present in her own body when the alternative was less useful. He came through the door and looked at her first, before he looked at the room, before he looked at Corvin. The gray-green eyes moved over her with the rapid assessment of someone checking for damage, and she saw the moment he registered that she was standing unhurt, coat in hand, and the specific quality of the breath he released. "He was here to deliver a message," she said. "He told me to stop the treatment. Stopping the Vanguard recovery is a priority for whoever sent him." "Did he threaten you?" "By omission." "Zoya." He implied without explicit statement that non-compliance would result in consequences to my person. "Yes, he threatened me." Something happened in Ryker's face that was not, she recognized, the nothing expression, and was not the carefully contained internal look, and was not the open directness she had catalogued on Wednesday evening. It was something older and less managed, and she watched it move through his expression in the 2 seconds before his control reasserted itself, and she filed it without making it into anything because she was genuinely too tired right now to make it into something. "You're moving to the secured quarters," he said. "Tonight." "My workroom?" "Will be relocated by morning." She looked at him for a moment. "I want to be included in the operational planning for the response. If they're targeting me specifically, I have information that may be useful." "Agreed. And I want to know, when you find out who sent him, before you act on it. Not after." He looked at her with the expression that she had no category for yet. "Agreed," he said again. "Good night, Ryker. I'll walk you to the secured quarters." "That's not." It wasn't a question. She looked at him. Then she picked up her medical bag and walked to the door, and he fell into step beside her, and neither of them spoke, and the compound was quiet around them, except for the sounds of the search teams moving through the grounds, and she walked beside him through the dark stone corridors and felt, for the first time since she had arrived with her list in her inside pocket, that she was in the right place. She had no idea what to do with that, so she filed it with everything else and went to bed. Chapter 7. The investigation took 5 days, and what it found was worse than a simple operative. The assassin was a freelance agent from a network that the Stonemark intelligence service had been tracking for 2 years, not directly affiliated with the enemy pack, but contracted through an intermediary that the intelligence team's analysis linked through a chain of financial transfers to a specific official within the enemy pack's council structure, not the Alpha, a council member operating independently, either with deniable approval or entirely off-book. "It's a faction within the pack," she said, sitting in the security briefing on the 5th day, "not the pack's full institutional position." "That's the current assessment," Corvin said, "which means there are political dynamics within that pack that are as complicated as any other pack's politics. And the council member in question may have motivations that diverge from the Alpha's actual intentions." She looked at Ryker. "This changes the calculus for a full response. If you hit the pack as a unit, you strengthen the faction by giving them an external threat to consolidate around." "We know," Ryker said. He was looking at the intelligence map on the table with the focused attention that she had come to recognize as his deepest operational mode. "That's why we haven't moved yet. What's the specific threat to the Vanguard? Not the poisoning. That's already being addressed. What does incapacitating your elite unit accomplish for a council member in an enemy pack?" Corvin and Ryker exchanged a look that communicated something she wasn't privy to. She waited. The Stonemark Pack has a standing arrangement with the Free Territories, Ryker said, a mutual protection agreement. The Vanguard is the enforcement mechanism of that agreement. If the Vanguard is incapacitated, the agreement effectively lapses, and the Free Territories' eastern border becomes vulnerable. There is a land interest in those territories that various parties have been pursuing for years. And if the Vanguard is publicly known to be incapacitated, the agreement collapses without anyone having to openly break it. Yes. Then the treatment timeline matters more than I initially communicated. If the Vanguard status becomes public knowledge before the critical cases are resolved, you may face a strategic crisis regardless of what we do about the council member. She looked at the map. How contained is the information currently? The Pack knows the unit is in medical care. The external intelligence isn't specific beyond that. Then we need to maintain that ambiguity while we complete treatment. The 2 critical cases after Dort should be resolving within 10 days. Once they're functional, even partially functional, the visible status of the unit changes. She tapped the map. Give me 10 days. You'll have them, he said. The meeting broke up, and she stayed to review the intelligence files. And when she looked up an hour later, the room was empty, except for Ryker still at the table, looking at nothing visible. The council member, she said. You know who it is. Yes, and it's specific. It's personal. He looked at her, the deep-water eyes, the whole face expression. He was on the initial diplomatic mission that established the Free Territories Agreement. He was present for the conversations. He knows the exact terms, the exact vulnerabilities in the arrangement. Someone you trusted with that information. Trusted is the wrong word. Someone I worked with, believed to be operating in good faith. That's closer to trust than you're acknowledging. He was quiet. The healer who came before me, she said. The one who said it was untreatable. Was that also? We believe so. A recommendation influenced by a contact. We can't prove it. She absorbed this, the specific cold geometry of it. A deliberate campaign layered over time, designed to dismantle something piece by piece. The poisoning, the false prognosis, the assassin targeting the cure. Someone very patient, working very carefully. You've been carrying this alone. It's my... If you say it's your responsibility, I'm going to remind you that we've had this conversation in a form close enough to count. She gathered her files. I'm going to go make Dort walk the length of the medical wing under his own power, which he is now capable of doing. When that's done, I'll write up the operational timeline for the remaining treatment and have it on your desk by evening. She stood. And then you're going to sleep in your actual quarters tonight. He looked at her with something that was on the edge of the small, specific expression she had no label for. That's not in the contract, he said. The contract covers medical terms. Your sleep patterns affect the Pack's functioning, which affects my patient's recovery environment. I'm expanding the definition. She left before he could answer. She heard, as she turned the corner, something that might have been the beginning of something she filed under the category she was running out of space for, and she walked faster and went to find Dort. Chapter 8. She made Dort walk the corridor. He managed 30 feet the first day, leaning on the wall, his wolf self visible in the way he moved, tentative, like someone testing ice they weren't sure would hold. She walked beside him and said nothing, encouraging, which he later told her was exactly right. Everyone else says good job like I'm a pup learning to shift. You just walked. You didn't need me to say good job, she said. You needed me to make it clear the floor was solid. On day 3, he walked 60 feet without the wall. On day 5, the full corridor. On day 7, She found him on the training grounds perimeter at dawn, not running, not even close to running, but standing in the morning air with his face up and his wolf self present and settled in a way she could feel from 20 feet away, the reintegration completing itself in the slow, thorough way that actual healing worked. The other two critical cases progressed in parallel, slower, because their presentations had been more advanced, but advancing. She adjusted doses by patient, tracking each response with the meticulous documentation discipline she required of Cassian and held herself to as well, because the data belonged to future healers who would face this compound or something like it, and the data was only useful if it was accurate and complete. The 10 days were the most concentrated work of her professional life. She slept 4 hours a night and ate when Cassian put food in front of her and barely saw the sun except from the workroom window, and she was aware, in the abstract way, that things you're too busy to process wait in a queue, that she would need to think about some things when she had time to think about them. The specific file she was not processing was the file that contained Wednesday evening on the north wall and the 3 in the morning corridor, and every moment in between, in which Ryker had done something that had gone into that file and added itself to the growing weight of a thing she had arrived with 12 conditions to prevent. She was self-aware enough to know she had not prevented it. She was practical enough to recognize that awareness and prevention were two different phases of the process, and she was still in awareness. On the 8th day, the intelligence team traced the financial chain to a confirmed name. She was in the security briefing when Corvin laid out the full picture, the council member, the payments, the contact with the freelance network, and the specific communication that had ordered the agent to her room. The communication had specified her by name, not the healer, not a generic description. Her name, Zoya Vesh, her origin pack, her specialty. Someone had done a specific research effort on her. Someone had decided that she specifically was the threat to be neutralized. She felt the particular cold of that, of being known, cataloged, targeted by a stranger as a piece in a game she hadn't been told she'd joined. She looked at Ryker across the briefing table. He was looking at her with the whole face expression, and she understood now what it was, or at least what it was part of. It was the expression of a man who was fully, completely present with what was in front of him, without the management and the containment, and what was in front of him right now was the information that someone had specifically targeted her, and he was feeling that without management. "What's the plan?" she said. Corvin laid it out. Diplomatic pressure through the Interpack Council, backed by the full chain of evidence. If the enemy pack's alpha was not complicit, and the intelligence assessment gave that a 70% probability, the evidence would force him to act against the council member himself, which resolved the faction problem without requiring a military response. If he was complicit, the Interpack framework provided escalation mechanisms. "And the assassin," she said. "In containment," Corvin said. "Cooperating." "Good." The briefing ended. The room cleared. She stayed and Ryker stayed, and she was aware that this was becoming a pattern. The staying after, the room emptying to the two of them, and she was aware that she was not doing anything to break the pattern. 9 days left on the treatment, she said. "I know." After that, the critical cases should be functional. The other wolves are already there. "I know." The 6-month contract has 4 months remaining. "I know." She looked at him. He was looking at her. "Is there something you want to say?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. The window behind him was full of the compound's late afternoon, the light going the particular gray of autumn that she had started to associate with this place. This specific quality of afternoon. "Not yet," he said. She stood. "When you're ready." She left, and this time she did not walk faster. Chapter 9. Dort ran on the training ground on a Saturday morning in the 7th week, and she watched from the north wall. The same place, the same view, different light. He ran in his wolf form for 6 circuits without stopping, and she watched the movement of it with the specific satisfaction of work that had become real in its body. The theoretical made physical, the things she had promised made true. He shifted back at the end and looked up and found her on the wall and raised one hand, a brief acknowledgement, the wolf version of a nod, and she raised one back. She heard Ryker arrive before she saw him, the specific quality of his footsteps, which she had memorized without intending to, the slightly uneven pace of someone who had an old injury in the left knee that they had declined to fully treat because they had never considered it an operational priority. She had opinions about that decision, but had not yet delivered them. He stood beside her, and they watched Dort for a moment. "The other 2, she said. "Ren and Cassie. Ren will be ready for light training by end of next week. Cassie needs another 10 days beyond that. The bond reintegration in his case was more complex. There was secondary damage to neural pathways that the enzyme mimic addressed, but that will need time to fully consolidate. And the early-stage wolves. Already on full duty, you have your unit back." He let out a breath, not a sigh. A release, the specific kind that comes when something you have been tensed against for a long time resolves. She heard it and felt it register in her own body in a way that she was done pretending was professional. "The contract," she said. "We should talk about it." "We should. I arrived with 12 conditions. You accepted all 12. "Yes." "The arrangement was for 6 months, and then my freedom." "Yes." "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as information rather than as a negotiation tactic, because it isn't one." She turned and looked at him directly. "I have not experienced this place the way I expected to experience it. I expected a transaction, a thing to be endured professionally. I expected that 6 months would feel like confinement, and that I would spend them carefully marking the days." She paused. "I have not spent them that way. That is not what this has felt like." He was looking at her with the deep water eyes, the whole face expression, the expression she had finally named to herself 2 nights ago, when she had stopped pretending the naming was unnecessary, the expression of a man who was paying complete attention to someone and had no remaining interest in pretending otherwise. "There is something I've been trying to figure out how to say," he said. "I have been working on it for approximately 3 weeks. That's a long draft. I don't say things before I understand them. It's a known limitation. I've noticed. What I have understood," he said, with the deliberate precision of someone delivering something they have held for a long time, "is that I brought you here as a strategic asset. That was the accurate description of what this was supposed to be. And what I have found is that I have spent 7 weeks being surprised by you on a daily basis, and I have found that He stopped, started again. "I have found that the 6 months looks different from here than it did from the beginning." "Different how?" "Shorter." She looked at him for a long moment. Dort was doing a second set of circuits below them, the easy, loping run of a wolf fully himself. The North Forest was gold in the autumn light. "I came here with 12 conditions," she said, "because I was afraid of exactly this, of a place becoming real, of work mattering, of—" She stopped. "Of you being a different kind of person than I had prepared for." "What kind of person did you prepare for?" "Cold, strategic, transactional." "I am strategic and transactional." You brought me food at midnight and slept in the anteroom of the medical wing for 4 weeks and looked at Dort running just now like you were watching your own heart do something you'd been afraid it couldn't do anymore." He was quiet. "Those aren't cold qualities," she said. "They're the opposite." Vance would have disagreed, he said, with a quality she recognized as the specific way a person says the name of someone they have lost. Present tense, in the way that loss keeps its people present. He used to say I ran cold, that I kept the important things too far inside to be useful to anyone, including myself. Vance, she said carefully, seems to have been observing a defense mechanism and describing it as a character trait. Something moved across his face. Not pain, the movement of something painful becoming something else. "He would have liked you," he said. "I would have wanted him to." The afternoon light shifted, 1 degree deeper toward the color of the compound stones at dusk, and she stood beside him without the professional distance, without the gap she had been maintaining for 7 weeks. And she looked at the forest and felt the specific, irrevocable, completely inconvenient truth that she had come to this place with a list of conditions specifically designed to prevent exactly this. And she had failed completely, and she was not sorry. "The contract," he said. "The contract," she agreed. "I want to rewrite it." "I know. You have conditions. I always have conditions. Tell me." She looked at him. "I'll write them down. You accept them in writing, witnessed by both elders. No amendment, without mutual consent." "Agreed." "And Ryker?" She met his eyes. "These conditions are going to be different from the first 12. I need you to understand that before I write them." He looked at her with the deep water eyes and the whole face expression and the complete, unmanaged attention of a man who has stopped keeping the important things too far inside. "I know," he said. Below them, Dort ran his 3rd circuit, and the compound's evening settling began, and the forest went amber and then dark, and the 2 of them stayed on the north wall until the stars came out, and neither of them felt the need to explain why they were still there. Chapter 10. She wrote the new list on a Sunday at the desk in the secured quarters that had become her quarters not by declaration, but by accumulation. The books she had added to the shelf, the secondary workbench she had asked for and been given, the morning light through the east window that she had started her days by for 7 weeks and had stopped thinking of as temporary. The new list had 7 items. She wrote them with the same cramped precision as the first 12, but the quality of the writing was different. Not the furious, self-protecting precision of a woman converting anger into armor, but the careful, clear precision of a woman writing something down because she wanted it to be exactly right. Item 1. She retained independent authority over all medical decisions. This one stayed. She had thought about removing it and decided that it wasn't relevant to what was changing. It was simply true, and the new contract should contain things that were simply true. Item 2. She would continue treating any wolf in the Stonemark compound who required her gift, not as an obligation, but as a practice, with the understanding that her practice was her own and could expand to include patients from outside the pack if she determined this was appropriate. He would not restrict its scope. Item 3. She would spend 2 months of each year at her father's pack, not to discharge a debt. The debt was his to manage, and she had no obligation to serve it, but because her father was old and her practice had roots there that she was not willing to sever. Item 4. They would make decisions about the compound together, where those decisions affected her domain, not because she wanted his permission, but because partnership required shared information, and she was not interested in a version of this that was not a partnership. Item 5. He would sleep in his actual quarters. Item 6. When he was carrying something alone that he did not need to carry alone, she wanted him to tell her. Not immediately, not before he had processed it himself. She understood he processed internally and was not going to require him to change his nature. But before it had accumulated to the point of damage, she had professional opinions about accumulated weight, and she was no longer going to apply them only to other people. Item 7. The contract had no end date. She folded the list and put it in her inside pocket, where the first list had lived against her sternum like armor, and she felt the difference in the weight of it. Not armor, something else. Something she had no clinical term for and did not need one. She found him in the training grounds perimeter in the early morning, which was where she had started to expect him at that hour. He ran it 3 times a week in the gray before dawn, alone, the specific solitary discipline of a man who gave everything to his pack all day and used the early morning to exist without giving anything to anyone. She had started being there too some mornings, not running. She ran like a healer, which was to say competently and without joy, but present, sitting on the perimeter bench with the morning's first work and the quiet of the compound before it woke. Neither of them had acknowledged this habit explicitly. It had simply become a thing that existed. He stopped when he saw her, and she stood and handed him the list. He read it, standing in the gray morning light, still warm from the run. With a methodical attention he gave everything. She watched him. She had stopped managing how she watched him, the peripheral, careful, everything filed approach, and was simply watching. He read item 7. He read it again. No end date, he said. No end date. This is significantly different from the first contract. Yes, Zoya. He said her name the specific way he had started saying it in the 5th week, not the transactional way names are said at the beginning of transactions, but the way names are said when they have accumulated enough context to carry weight beyond their syllables. I want to be clear about what I'm agreeing to. So be clear. I'm agreeing to all 7 items. I'm agreeing to item 5, which, yes, I know, I'm agreeing to item 6, which is going to be difficult and which I will work at anyway. He paused. I'm agreeing to item 7 specifically because I want to. Not because the pack needs my gift. Not primarily because the pack needs your gift. The pack does need your gift. That is also true. I am not going to pretend the practical consideration is absent, because that would be a lie, and I have found that I am disinclined to lie to you. That's very honest. You wrote the practical consideration into item 2. You already accounted for it. I did, because you are detail-oriented. Professionally. He looked at her with the deep water eyes in the gray morning light. The compound's training ground behind him, the forest beyond the wall going from dark to the first light of the day, and she looked back at him without the gap, without the professional distance, without any of the 12 defenses she had arrived with. Agreed, he said, to all 7. I'll have the contract drawn up by this evening. Witnessed by both elders. Naturally. No amendment without mutual consent. That's item 4. I was confirming. She looked at him. He was doing the small specific expression that she had been filing for 7 weeks and had recently stopped pretending she hadn't named. The one that was, she had concluded, his version of the thing she felt when the work became real, and the place became real, and the person became someone she had not prepared for and could not have prepared for, regardless of how many lists she wrote. I came here with 12 conditions, she said. I know. Prepared for an outcome I was sure I understood. I know, so did I. We were both wrong. Yes, I find I don't mind. Neither, he said, do I. The morning came fully, and the compound woke below them. The sounds of the pack beginning its day, the kitchen fires, the training ground filling, somewhere Dort's voice in the middle distance giving some poor younger wolf a hard time about his form, which she knew, because Dort's voice had a specific carrying quality, and because she had started to know the pack's voices the way you know things that have become yours. She stood in the perimeter's gray morning beside the man she had arrived with 12 defenses against, and she felt, for the first time since she had climbed into a convoy at dawn with her bag and her coat and her armor, the precise opposite of what she had expected. Not confinement, not transaction, not the cold, strategic, careful distance she had spent so much of her adult life maintaining, something she had no clinical term for and had stopped needing one. The contract was signed that evening, witnessed by Elder Sene of the Stonemark pack and Elder Vor of the Vesh neutral pack, who had traveled for the occasion and who told Zoya afterward, in the quiet of the east quarters that were now simply her quarters, that her grandmother would have found the whole situation extremely predictable. Your grandmother, Elder Vor said, always said you'd meet your equal in the most inconvenient possible person at the most inconvenient possible time. My grandmother said a lot of things, Zoya said. She was usually right. Zoya thought about a man with deep water eyes who had accepted 12 conditions without a word of argument and had spent 7 weeks being someone she had not prepared for. She thought about Dort running under his own power. She thought about the north wall at Amber Light. Yes, she said, she was.
Thank you for watching this video till the end. I hope you have found it very enjoyable. I like the character Zoya. Zoya reminds us of people who are confident in themselves, people who are not afraid to set boundaries that men and women, particularly those who are highly placed, are quick to break in order for them to have their ways. She stood with her boundaries, and that made her very valuable, not just before the king, but also before all the members of his pack. And if we can do that in our personal life, a lot of respect will come to us also. Many of us are quick to shift grounds, particularly when we are before highly placed people, simply because we want them to accept us. And that is a terrible mistake, because eventually they only accept a version of us that we present to them and not who we truly are. The Alpha King is also a worthy example in this regard. Now, very powerful, very stealth, very, very effective, highly respected, and yet he understood the value of somebody else. It is not really so in many cases. His love for his people, his love for his community made him to make adjustments normally he would not make, to really embrace this lady, because he knows that she was going to be of great help to them. And that is to say that pride itself can really hinder us from opening the doors for people around us to receive help, simply because we feel our ego has been bruised. So we see very clear examples from the two of them. I would like to get your thoughts on this. Maybe feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Thank you very much, and see you in the next one.